Hi, everybody. I'm Dennis Daly. I spent 20 years with United Press International, most of it with the old UPI Radio Network. And my favorite assignment was going on the road producing and hosting American Montage. It was an hour-long weekly program. Now here's an edited version of one of those shows. If you're one of those people who thinks Alaska is too far away to visit, you may be looking at the wrong kind of map. Look at a globe, for example. That will give you a much better idea of the relationship of many Alaskan cities to the U.S. There are now great airline connections. Alaska Airlines, for example, which flew us up to Anchorage, has a lot of flights from Seattle, just about 3 hours. In downtown Anchorage, a beautiful museum dedicated to the history of the 49th state. I walked around with newspaper columnist Mike Dugan from the Anchorage Daily News. We talked about the state, its lifestyle, its traditions, and about the museum. This is quite a building here. We're halfway up a flight of steps, and there's a little observation area here. Looks down on a fountain, a lot of coins being thrown in. One of the things that impresses me, and my listeners know I love to eat, is that this is one of the few museums I've been in which has a nice enough restaurant that people come here just to eat.
Yeah, they've done, the Alaska History of Museum and Art has done a good job with this facility. It's one of the many sort of public buildings that you'll find in Alaska that's a tribute to the Prudhoe Bay oil money. That's where the funds came from to build it. And they've discovered along the way that they have to do a lot of different things to be able to finance the day-to-day operations, and the restaurant's one of those things. And as a matter of fact, if you were up here and you wanted to get married in high style, you could have your wedding reception right here in this atrium.
That's what I've been told. This is kind of a grand staircase. Let's go ahead up the steps. There's so many things I want to ask, and that's the problem with doing a quick visit anywhere. I so often find myself walking into a city and spending the night doing an interview and then leaving, which unfortunately is the case here. Mm-hmm. Let's start on the downside. What are the misconceptions people in the lower 48 have about Alaska that you'd like to dispel?
Well, I'll tell you this story. When I went outside to college in the late 1960s, people found out I was from Alaska. They immediately started asking me questions like, do you live in an igloo? And being young and naive, I told them the truth, which is, no, I don't. I live in a house. And, proceeded to give them sort of the straight dope about what it's like to live here. And after I began to notice that they went away disappointed, I simply began agreeing. Yes, we do live in an igloo. We have a split-level igloo. We commute to school by a dog sled. And they, not only did they believe it, they went away happy. And I think there's a certain kind of attitude in what we call outside, which is any place that is in Alaska, where people like to think that this is sort of the rugged last bastion of the wilderness. And if you get outside town, you can see where they think that. But most of us live in cities. About 75% of us live in cities. And in places like Anchorage and Fairbanks and Juneau, the life isn't too much different than it is in a similar-sized city anywhere in the United States, except for the weather.
But you have great air connections up here. Now, we are in not quite winter yet, and the temperature this afternoon is around 6 or 7 degrees.
Balmy 6.
But it's not windy. Now, needless to say, your tourist draws, except for winter sports and cross-country skiing, are going to be springtime. In the southern part of Alaska here, how moderate does it get in the good weather season?
Well, when you're in Anchorage, which has what they call a coastal climate, the weather's sort of moderate both ways. So if you get a 70-degree day, for instance, in the summer, it's pretty hot here. But generally speaking, from May on, if you get anything cooler than 50, it's pretty cold. And so most of the temperature here in Anchorage is going to be in that range.
Mike, what paper you work for here, and what is your role as a columnist, commentator?
Yeah, I'm the Metro columnist for the Anchorage Daily News, which means that the slave drivers I work for force me to write 3 columns a week about pretty much anything. We're having a problem right now, for instance, with moose in the downtown areas. They have been wandering around in increasing numbers.
You're not talking about the Moose Lodge here.
No, I'm talking about those big, ugly, ungulate animals that most people are probably familiar with from the beginning of Northern Exposure, that old TV program. But But there's an increasing number of automobile accidents where people are hitting moose. They come through and eat people's trees and make them mad. And so there are some sort of peculiarly Alaskan kinds of issues here. Every once in a while, a brown bear gets loose in downtown, and the police have to shoot it. But the rest of it is all, the municipal politics are all pretty much the same. Zoning and garbage disposal and road maintenance and that kind of stuff.
We're on what you might call the veranda or the mezzanine level of the second level of the museum here. There's a great gallery of photos around here. I always love historic photos. The thing that interested me in talking to someone before we went on the air here is the fact that the city of Anchorage is a new city. We're talking about 1915, so all of the early days, there's photographic evidence of when it was not here at all.
That's right. This was up until actually about 1914. This was an outwash flat of a couple of rivers. And it wasn't until the federal government decided to build a railroad from open water, which in this case is sewered, up to Fairbanks in the interior that this place even existed. And what happened was people who wanted railroad jobs came and squatted down in the mud flats along Ship Creek. You're still really pretty well in touch with your history here. My own father, who was born on Douglas Island in 1914, is still alive. And so you can still go and talk to people who remember Anchorage when it was just a bunch of trees, and sort of remember the state from an era that's long gone by. And people do, they go down to the Pioneer Home. There are oral histories that have been recorded, and there's still a lot of interest in that early history.
Were there many what we would call Native Americans in this region? Was this a fairly desolate section of coastline, or does some of the heritage go back to that also?
There was this part of Alaska was in the custody of a group of Athabascan Indians called variously the Tenina and the Denena. There really wasn't a part of the Alaska coast that didn't have Native Americans on it. And the ones on the coast generally did better. The food was more plentiful. The climate was a little bit better. I believe they flipped a coin to decide which would be the 49th state and which would be the 50th. And Alaska won, I guess, because it's the 49th state and Hawaii's the 50th.
But yet, shortly after that, in '64, you had the devastating earthquake here. And I guess you could debate it one way or the other, but one would like to think that a lot of the support you got afterwards was because of the fact you were in the Union. Or maybe it would have been the same had you been only a territory.
Well, at least initially, I think it would have been the same. The response to the initial response to the disaster, a lot of it was the United States military that came in and sort of bailed people out, and I don't think that would have changed. But there were things that people got because Alaska was a state, which are primarily small business loans and other kinds of things that allowed them to rebuild that I don't think they would have gotten had it been a territory.
Mike, what was that like? I understand that you were not in Anchorage, you were in Fairbanks when the earthquake happened, but we saw coverage of it. What was that like psychologically and in other ways when that quake happened in '64? I mean, we've seen terrible photos of that.
Well, it was, for one thing, it was strong enough to knock me down on the street in Fairbanks 400 miles away. So it was a big shake. But it didn't really, I'm not exactly sure how to explain this. In Anchorage, for instance, it beat the devil out of several parts of town, some of which are now part of the inlet and were never rebuilt. But it didn't really seem to bother the people here that much. They just sort of picked themselves up and kind of continued. And
well, maybe dealing with harsh weather hardens a person to adversity.
There's something in that.
Michael, thank you.
Thanks.
And there you have it, another edited episode of one of the American Montage programs prepared for the UPI Radio Network back in the 1980s and 90s. I'm Dennis Daly. Thanks for listening. Thanks for going with me this week. And check YouTube for more American Montage programs.